what you'll notice is that we have one date represented. We have one placement ID, so one ID as it relates to the third-party ad server. But we have 3 different publisher IDs. And that's really the key to this solution, is that one placement ID can go to multiple different places within a publisher's site, and with this method can be recorded as such, so that when a discrepancy is discovered, if, for instance, this cycle is done on a nightly basis and a discrepancy is discovered, it's a lot easier to understand exactly where that discrepancy occurred. So now I'm going to turn this over for a minute to these guys, because it's important to understand that as a third-party ad server, we don't have any idea what that ID is or what it represents. So I want to give these guys an opportunity to explain their process and how they've chosen to use that.
So Madison CBS Interactive's proprietary ad system, we're passing in the scheduled creative ID. As Steve mentioned, it's pretty flexible. We started off passing the line ID and then just moved into the actual creative ID, since that's the most granular level at which we're tracking impressions in our ad system. So we track on a daily level, we track at the creative level, that's what we're passing in. Again, as Steve mentioned, you can pretty much choose to pass in whatever works for you.
And at Weather, we took a similar approach. We're a Solbright customer, and Solbright assigns a flight ID, and we've chosen to use that flight ID as the variable to pass. As we've moved through the testing cycle, we've actually begun some discussions about inserting multiple values into that slot as opposed to just one. So for example, we've thought about the flight ID in addition to a flight date, because that flight ID might be static, but we might traffic multiple creatives through each with a different start date. So we're trying to take the best advantage of what's made available to us. I suspect that we'll probably add enough values that we will probably max out that length before we're done.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be the first to raise that question of whether we're going to be able to adjust that, maybe make it longer someday. So we'll have to talk about that. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about reporting options. What I showed in the previous slide was just a snippet, an example of what that data might look like. What we have in terms of options are, we'll call it in order of importance. Log into my reports. I'm sure that somebody here has been through the pain of that process, and that's still available. What I would say is the value of that particular approach is to pull a monthly report, for instance. You can go back and look at a whole month of this particular data. We also have a feature called scheduled reports. It's not terribly widely understood. It's a valuable feature in the sense that it allows you to automate the retrieval of data even on a daily basis. It's certainly available and can be discussed. But we also have the reporting API. So that was just released maybe a month ago. We haven't built a lot of fanfare around it. There's going to be a blog post in coming days talking about it. But if you have any questions in terms of understanding how to use it or where to get the documentation, you can follow up with me afterwards. But that's pretty exciting. What it represents is a publisher API access to reports. So now there's some considerations, and these are considerations that don't necessarily have to do specifically with reporting, but with where we are today. And one is that we currently don't support rich media. So that's not a surprise. It was, in fact, I think I remember last year someone asking the question and us saying we're going to take it one step at a time. But what it means is that in particular, Atlas Rich Media, the vendor, we don't support that particular creative type. So what that means is that when you look at a report of ads running on your network, and some of those ads are Atlas Rich Media ads, those aggregated numbers will not add up properly. They'll actually show discrepancies. Now, it's not a problem for everyone. In fact, I'm pretty sure that in the case of weather.com, they have no Atlas Rich Media, so the numbers look great. In fact, we'll talk about that in a minute, but when I saw the first report, I was very excited because they looked fantastic. In the case of CBS, there's a few that are rich media. So what we're working on is a way in the short term to do differentiation of creative. So either create a report that excludes Atlas-rich media so that you'll know when it doesn't show up that you're, that it's not, that you don't need to worry about it, or to be able to identify it in the report. And then, of course, longer term, we're talking about building in support for the Atlas-rich media. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kamal, because this is an example of one of the reports that we've done and also how they've chosen to use it.
So this shows an example of the report that we pull from Atlas. We're using the scheduled version of the reports. So we just set it up once and choose to get aggregates at a weekly and a monthly level. It's fairly straightforward. The report that we get back shows you, what's the date range that we've chosen to run the report for. There's an additional field that Atlas is including that's beyond the IAB spec, which is the placement name. When it comes to debugging purposes, just helps to have something which is more readable over there. The publisher universal ID, now this is the ID that we talked about in the previous slide. That's what we're choosing to pass in. It's the scheduled creative ID in our case. And then we get the aggregated counts back for that date range. So fairly straightforward. We're passing in the creative ID. We're getting back the aggregate counts. This report also is kind of useful. You might have one Atlas tag, but as Steve talked about, we might choose to break it into multiple line items. Now, again, we don't have to bother with that, broken out, how we break it out, and so on, because we're getting the counts back based on our creative ID.
And us at Weather, for all the vendors in the room, we're not quite as far along as the folks at CBS are, so we frustrate everybody with our slow speed, not just you guys. We've taken a similar approach in the beta period that we are in. We are sort of moving from the completeness phase to the accuracy phase. By completeness, I mean making sure that we were getting data back for all of the lines that we put into the test, and are now sort of in the accuracy phase. And as Steve mentioned, I don't think that the accuracy phase is going to last that long, with the discrepancies being minimal at best between the two organizations. One choice that we have made internally, since this is all about efficiency for us, and that's why we were raising our hands to participate here, we will probably jump very quickly to using the API. Currently, it's about a week-long cycle for us, which isn't going to work. We want to catch things as soon as we possibly can. So once we get through this two-phase beta cycle that we've got, then we'll probably be working with Steve and his team on how to make the best use of that API.